Hope you're nice and relaxed and looking forward to some fantastic sessions this afternoon. Can I just remind you that there are 2 sessions happening at the same time this afternoon. So if you plan to go to Rob Davidson's Venue Sales Masterclass, that's in the Rodopi room just across the other side of the corridor. But you should stay here because there's some great stuff coming up from these 3 guys in just a moment. But before we do that, just a little bit of relaxing yoga to get us into the afternoon session. So if I could ask Marina and Irina from Contour Wellness just to give you a few exercises to start you off this afternoon. Ladies.
So, would you please now put your hands on your kneecaps, back, straighten your backs, inhale, and while exhaling, curl in the spine very slowly, vertebra by vertebra. Relax your chin, roll on onto your sit bones, and come back to center. This time relax the head on your back. Feel the lower back bend. Come back to center, curl in again. Come back to center and back. And now we'll continue with some twists. Put please your legs together. Plant well your feet. So right arm goes over your left knee. Left arm on the backrest of your chair. Breathe in, and while exhaling, twist to the left. Look backwards. Come back to center. Now left arm over your left knee. Right arm on the chair. Look back and twist. And let's repeat once again. Right arm, left knee, left arm, back seat. And again to center and to the other side. And come back to center. So we continue now with some more stretches. Palms together in front of your chest. Breathing in slowly. Raise arms up all the way over your head. Keep palms together all the time. And stretch a little bit more. Reach the sky. And come back to center. Now interlace fingers and let's do the same. Feel the change in the stretch. It's a little bit stronger. Reach up. And come back to center. Now palms up in front of you. Go in again. And come back to center. And stretch upwards, palms out. And now lower your arms. And once again to the front. And center. Breathe in and stretch. And come back to center. So now arms will be behind our backs, interlaced again. Put them on the backrest of the chair. Breathe in and while exhaling, drop your head back. Open your chest. Feel the widening of your chest. And center. And again. Great. So relax your arms, shake the arms. Do a few shoulder rolls backwards. And reverse. And remember, it's very important to breathe all the time. So we will continue with a few stretches for the legs. Lower legs, lift the left, oh, pardon, I'm a little bit excited. Okay, come back, down, and And now the left leg, stretch and down and stretch again. And this time do circles with your ankles in one direction and now to the other direction and release. Now with the other leg, circle in one direction and the other one and relax. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Marina and Irina of Contour Wellness. That's great. It's put you in the right state to receive some fantastic information. So we've now got not one, not two, but three presenters for our first session this afternoon. They're going to explain to you how to use event technology to generate valuable data from events. So our three presenters from three different companies. From Glisser, we have Mike Piddock. From Insight XM, we have Chett Rubenstein. And from Fundamental Media, we have Will Fearnley-Whittingstall. So please welcome our speakers to the stage, and Mike's going to kick off.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Whilst my colleagues cross the stage, I'd just like to introduce you first to Glisser. So the great advantage of founding an event technology company, particularly one involved in presentations, is I get to use my own product whilst I'm talking to you. So Glisser allows you to see the slides live as I present them on your own devices. And to do that, if you've downloaded the app previously, you can get it through the app. Or if you've not yet downloaded the app, you can actually navigate to this web page, so glsr.it/evx1, and you'll get a similar experience. And what that means specifically is that we have a regular presentation file, but we also have down the side a toolbar that shows me how many questions I'm being asked. It also shows you how many questions you're asking. We can run a Twitter feed, and we also have like votes, so you have the opportunity to upvote any slides that you're particularly interested in. So we offer a live second screen on an audience's own devices. We've got some polls in, so there are some polls in there, so please, when we get to those, participate by voting in those. You can, if you want, actually, on the app, mark up the slides with your own notes. You can draw on them, and on an iPad, you just pull out the pen button. On an iPhone, you twist it so it's horizontal, and then you can draw on the slides. And you're more than welcome to share our slides on Twitter. So if you attach a Twitter account, you can actually tweet the slides. So I've seen some of you today taking photos of screens, and often that's to tweet those slides. Well, actually, through the application, we're able to do that. At any time, I can bring those things up. So there are 100 tweets already on the Eventex hashtag. So if I pop that, I can just pull up a Twitter wall instantly. And I'll close that for now. So this is what I'd like you to do today. Like the slides that you think are useful. When we do this presentation again, we will remove slides that don't get many like votes. So please like the ones that you think are useful. Please ask questions throughout. We may get to them during the presentation, but we may save them all till the end. So use the function to ask a question around what we're presenting, and feel free to tweet any of our slides today. So for those of you that are in the app, we've got a poll already. So if you'd like to vote in the poll, this is just to get things going. Let us know where you've come in from today. So I'll give you a second or so to vote on that. So we're starting to get some votes in, and as you can see, that's an instant feed. I've just hit the space bar to have that vote come in. So I'm not switching technology. The AV guys aren't having to work here. It's all fed through directly in the PowerPoint. You can see nearly half of the audience here from Bulgaria. You can already start to see that this is a useful way of collecting data live during a presentation. I'll move on to the next poll here. This is a poll where we'd like to know how well you think your business is using data already. So you can vote from 1 to 5, and we'd like to understand where you think your business is, with 1 being poor and 5 being that you're using data around events very well already. And again, we can start pulling up that poll. This is the average score here. So at the moment, this audience is slightly below average in terms of data usage at events, which I think is a good point to be, because that's why we're here to talk about how we can try and help you at least get above the 3, hopefully towards one of the people here that's voted 5. So why are there 3 of us on stage? Why are we sharing this slot? Well, I think it's really interesting that we've got a dynamic here, a group of people that represent lots of different functions in the data for events process. So my background is actually as a client. So I was running corporate marketing teams and running events for those companies, just like many of you do. I then jumped out of that world and became an event technology developer. So I've kind of got 2 hats here. I'm both the person that wants the data, the corporate, and I'm also the person that's developed a piece of technology to try and gather that data. Next, we've got Will. Will used to work for me when I worked for a corporate, and his role was to help me buy media. And that media includes advertising, it includes direct mail, includes digital marketing, and it used to include events. So whenever I was assessing events, I would speak to Will to help me understand which events were worth attending, which were worth sponsoring, and which we shouldn't go to at all. And then finally, Chett. So Chett is CTO of InsightXM, which is a business which crunches data around events. So he takes all of the information that we can gather, whether it's through an app like Glisser or through a media buyer like Will, and is able to crunch that data and actually use it effectively. So there's kind of, you're getting three angles on the problem from us today. So my background, corporate, I originally worked in the telecom space, and there we were running events, very large events, about 12 a year, that were to businesses and to employees. So in-house kickoff events where we used to spend around £2 million per event to run those. We had 1,000 employees, so the maths is pretty simple. We spent £2,000 per employee at those events in order to motivate them and in order to deliver a message to them so that they were on board for the next year. We also put in place large spend at events. We were a heavy sponsor. We would spend around £500,000 sponsoring events, a single event, and we'd spend the same again putting media and things around that event in order to make it successful. I then moved into financial services, where it was a different game. We ran 200 events a year, but they were only £1,000 each. Lots of small events in a very cookie-cutter approach. But the similarities when I did both of those things was that I had a major problem, and that was that although we were spending a significant amount of marketing budget on events, we found it really, really difficult to understand whether that event had been successful. So we were spending £2 million motivating our employees, and we weren't very good at telling whether they were actually motivated. We didn't even ask them whether they would rather that £2,000 was given to them as cash rather than spent on an event. We didn't know that. It may have been that they would have been more motivated by the cash alone than running the event. But the data collection wasn't there. And then we were running all of these financial services events every year, and I had a major problem, was that I wanted to collect information from that event, and I wanted data to understand whether those events were successful in terms of leading to more sales. And this was my problem. We ran 200 events a year, and each one had around 50 delegates, so relatively small events. And we used to capture 20 pieces of data from those delegates, but that was done through a printed feedback form. So we would require them to fill out the feedback form at the end of the session because we wanted that data. It was useful to us so that we could follow up with them in the right way and ensure that the sessions were useful. But that 20 data fields meant that I had 200,000 CRM entries to put into our Salesforce database. And actually, when we did this, we didn't even have Salesforce in place at the time. We had our own in-house CRM system, which was really, really difficult to use and really difficult to put this data into our system. So although we were capturing data, we had a problem that it used to take us 400 man days just to type up the feedback from our events. So 2 people pretty much spent their entire jobs typing in data from events. So we had the data, we were collecting it, we wanted to make use of it, we wanted to feed it into our marketing, but the problem was typing it in. We weren't collecting it in a sensible way. We weren't using technology. So that's why I left that business to form Glisser, because the first thing I wanted to do was collect that data and put it into a system and collect it in a way through technology that would mean that I wouldn't have to pay for 2 people to type that data up year after year. And I think that's a really important point, and I think everyone talking about technology has kind of stressed the idea that you shouldn't just put in place technology for technology's sake. Don't just do it because it's fancy and you like the idea of having tech. It has to solve a problem. My problem was that I had a data entry issue and it was just taking up time. It was costly. If I could find a piece of tech which would solve that problem and be cheaper than those 2 employees that had to type that data in, that was technology being used to solve a problem. So whenever we talk about technology in events, make sure it's solving a problem. And it's a key point that you need to identify your problem. So now going on to the meat of the topic rather than that background. My question is, first of all, where is the industry today? Well, there's a problem at the moment that the industry focuses on the C-level opinion, in my view. That you have a CEO, and that CEO's view is what drives everything. So what drives the measure of success at your events? Is it the C-level opinion, or are you collecting data? Quickly reveal that. A lot of it's the post-event survey. So if you think about that, you think about maybe SurveyMonkey or something like that. That's an issue. But actually, the industry's in great health. 78% expect the events industry to grow, and 52% of people surveyed expect it to grow by over 25%. Clients are spending more. So the industry's in rude health, but we do have an issue, and I think this is really interesting. Despite the data that says events are really important, they haven't been killed by technology, there's a problem here that I did a search on Google for the term convince your boss. So I don't know why I did that. I read an article and it was about convincing your boss something. So I thought, I wonder what Google says people need to convince their bosses they should do. I thought maybe they would say it's convince your boss that you should be able to use social media in the office, or convince your boss that you should get a pay rise. I thought that's what people would be Googling. But actually, 5 of the top 7 results on Google for the term convince your boss was convince your boss you should go to this event. Why are we having to write these guides to convince our bosses that we should attend things like this? That's a major problem. Event spend is going up, but there's a credibility problem, and we're having to convince our bosses. And that's the challenge we have as an industry. How do we do that? We believe that the answer is data. Now, where do we collect that data? Look at these curves here. Think about your events. When you're communicating with your customers, are you communicating like the curve B, where there's an equal amount of communication before the event and after the event with a peak in the middle? Or are you communicating with your audience more like A, where a lot is done in front of the event, before the event? There's still a peak during the event, but then it drops off very early. Or is it more like C, where actually the bulk of the communication is actually taking place after the event. Similarly, data collection, same issue. Are you collecting data before, after, or during the event mostly? And we can look at this and ask this question. So again, have a quick vote. What best describes your data collection at events? Mostly before, mostly during, mostly post, or no data collection at all? It's interesting. Post-event, that's excellent. The reality is, if you win a customer in any other part of a business world, the focus has to be after that customer has been won. You spend a lot of time winning them. You have sales teams driving them into your business. But then the real communication, the real data collection tends to be after the event. And that's really important. And that's what the event industry needs to do. It needs to consider not just the communication and the data in the run-up to the event. It needs to think about what happens when the event's finished. And we were discussing just some ideas last night about what we would do if we wanted to, one single thing that we could do to make an event better for someone. Different ideas. And one of the ideas we had was, after an event's finished, why not email every attendee and ask them who attended that event that they didn't get to meet, and would they like a warm introduction? Because for me as an event attendee, if I miss someone that I hope to see here, that's frustrating. That one person could make the event for me. So it's just an idea. It's thinking about the event post-event, not just stopping thinking, that's great, I finished the event, I can relax now, and moving on. So I'm going to hand over to Will, who's now going to talk about how he assesses events from a media agency perspective.
Thanks, Mike. So we're Fundamental Media. We're a specialist financial media agency. We work with asset managers, investment banks the world over. And collectively, we plan around $100 million worth of media across all media types every year. And that ranges from outdoor, print, digital, television, and increasingly events. And it might seem quite strange that a media agency gets involved in planning events, but I think some of the background to that is clients are becoming more and more accustomed to getting advice and insight. And what our job is as an agency is to work out what our clients' goals are and appropriately give them suggestions of media that are going to allow them to deliver on those goals, whether it be for accessing their audience in the right places at the right time or delivering provable ROI. And the real value for our clients is to be able to tell them in a meaningful way, backed up with what we'd consider hard data, why they should be doing something and justifying their media spend. As I say, events, and as Mike pointed out, events is a growing business. I had one client comment to me last year. It's really difficult for them to understand which events they should go to because there's so many of them now. They're spoilt for choice. And in some ways, it'd be a lot easier for them if it went back to the old days where there were no events which served their target market because they don't know how much time and how much resource to put into attending those events. And some of them are very good and some of them are very bad. I think part of this increased expectation to be able to justify media and media selection comes from the rise of digital media and social media, where we can identify very clearly what return on investment looks like. The chart here is a very straightforward attribution model, which we use to work with our clients to plot and identify successes and failures in digital media campaigns. Here we can take an individual and see the individual touch points our media campaigns had with them, whether it be through a search term in Google, whether it be through a banner advert, whether it be through natural search, or even content views. We can plot that experience for an individual user. We can see where they interacted and then the final actions they took, whether it be to visit a site, to convert, to spend, and even how much they spend. And our clients want that level of information for every single pound they spend. And we can achieve that through most media. For television, we have national and international surveys which tell us which channels, which programs are read. We can do it for print. We ourselves in-house conduct readership surveys for our target audiences to find out which media helps our clients make business decisions for them. But events seems to be very, very different. Events, there is a perceived value in attending our event. Our clients seem to think that, yes, I want to shake hands with people who want to do business with me. But how much should I spend on that? What's a valuable use of my time? And we can see clearly that if we think about events, they are a subjective nature. They are a subjective beast. So, and we can do that by sort of taking a thought example, if you like. We can take an event where a marketing director has been approached by an event organizer and said, we are going to have 100 of your best customers at this event. You should attend. It's an opportunity for you to network with people you are doing business with and to network with people you aren't doing business with. And the marketing director says, yes, I want to sponsor this event and I want my CEO to come along. We can take this event and actually, on the day of the event, promised 100 people in attendance, but only 5 of them are actually the best customers. The rest of the room is filled with the periphery of the industry, competitors for this sponsoring company. And if we take 2 sponsoring companies, both with the same goal of attending the event, to interact with as many of their best customers as possible, CEO 1 comes along, walks in the room, sees 5 of his customers and 95 people who he has spent money that are his competitors. He has a lunch, he sits down to his biggest competitor, they have a nice catch-up, they go away from this event, he hasn't met any of his best customers. He calls the marketing director into his office the next day and says, that event was rubbish. I spent £10,000 of our marketing budget to achieve nothing apart from a wasted day. However, CEO number 2, who has a similar process in attending the event, he comes in, he sees 5 of his best customers. The first coffee break, he goes and has a lovely chat, they exchange business cards and set up a meeting. At lunch, he sits next to another one of his customers who he has been trying to get hold of for the past 3 months. They exchange business cards and they set up a meeting to take place the following week. That CEO goes to his marketing director the next day and says, thank you very much. That event was brilliant. I met my customers and I've had a provable outcome of it. Now, if we take that event, we'd arguably say that that event was a failure. It didn't deliver what it promised to deliver. However, despite that, CEO number 2 is always going to sponsor and attend that event because he had 1 or 2 positive experiences. And do we think that's the right way of judging an event? Do we think that it's that subjective nature? But if that's the best we can do, then we've got a real problem. So how do we, as a media agency, counteract that? There are pieces of data that we can gain independently about events. And what we as an agency do, we try and compile event fact sheets. Some of it is qualitative and some of it is quantitative. The quantitative measures of events that we can measure are the history of the event, how long has it been going, how good is the event organizer, what other events do they organize, what other media do they have that has provable data that will give a reason for us to support that event. How many sponsors do they have? Are those sponsors consistent? Has a sponsor been doing the same event for 5 years? Because if so, that's a pretty good indication that that event is achieving something meaningful. What about delegates? How many delegates has it had? In previous years, has it delivered the number of delegates it's promised? Has it delivered the type of delegates it's promised? And we can see that we can start to build up more and more factual information about an event that we can then assess with our client. And you can see we start to calibrate that into scores and to data, which is really useful. Equally, we give the qualitative analysis. We ask people who've attended. We ask previous sponsors, what did they get out of it? What was good? What was bad? Would they go again? And we can start to build manually some information that helps our clients decide whether they should pay or spend time at this event. The difficulty with this information is it's still not very robust. It often depends on third parties. And events organisers such as yourself, sometimes you're not brilliant at sharing with us this information. It can be hard to get hold of, and it can be difficult for you to understand how we're going to use that. And I think some of the resistance that we get as a media agency to getting this information is because event organisers don't understand how we're going to use this data. And if you don't understand how we're going to use this data, you're always going to be sort of slightly reticent to share it because you think it's going to show up your event in a bad light. Or maybe you just don't know the value of what you have and how we can use that to help you do your job better. Equally, and some of the other problems is clients aren't always set up in the right way to judge what they've got out of the event. And taking the pre, during and post-event marketing, We can see if a client hasn't set up the best sales team that they've got to come along, meet as many people as possible, and get business cards, and then set up meetings, then the event's going to feel like it hasn't achieved much. Equally, if there isn't a process in place from a client end to assess an event afterwards, we don't follow up. So from that event, how many meetings did we have, and what did we get out of that meeting? There is no data to support that event. And when it comes round the next year, so what did we get out of that event? Clients themselves can't answer that question. Mike, how did you at Octopus deal with that sort of issue?
Events. One of the challenges was measuring, and we simply had a measure that was cover our costs. You know, as a client paying cash to run events, cash to sponsor events, we simply wanted to cover our costs with the people that we met. That was the level of analysis we were able to make on what was the biggest spend in our marketing budget. And that was a few years ago. It shouldn't be like that now. There's technology in place to help you collect this. But Will is talking about the challenges of working with that technology and working with events companies to gather that data from them.
And you know, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to tell our clients, this is something you should do. This is something we've got really good evidence that if you go to this event, you'll meet your customers, you'll interact with them, you'll meet people you do know, you'll meet people you don't know, and this will have a positive effect on your business and your brand. And we need information. We need trustable information that allows us to do that job. And some of the decisions that I see today from our clients still are about, I want to sponsor this event. Is it a good deal? Well, how do we know if it's a good deal in anything other than price terms? We need information. What's the net result of this for our business? The net result of it is, you know, we have a real problem in being able to recommend events. I would say 90 to 95% of the events that we assess, and as an agency we assess nearly 2,000 events a year with soft data and hard data, we cannot recommend. And that's not to say we don't recommend. That's not to say don't do this event. That's to say we do not have sufficient information to recommend to our clients that they should attend those events or sponsor those events. That means that the 5 to 10% of events that do give us that information are cleaning up. They're taking a lot of spend out of other events, which may be equally as good, maybe even better, but don't provide us with a transparency of data that allows us to say, yes, you should do this. And if you compare this to other media sets, so if we look at TV, digital, radio, print, we can say clearly that most of the things that we encounter or come up with for our clients, we can make a recommendation either for or against. We don't have to sit on the fence. So how can you as event organizer, what can you do in order to help us get sponsors and attendees for your events? I think Chett's going to talk about that.
Thank you, Will. So it's interesting for me to hear these two gentlemen talk about some of the challenges that they see around events. And some of you in the room may recognize the company that I came from, eTouches, which is one of the global brands for event logistics and registration. And through that experience, we saw better part of 7 million plus registrations across 500,000 plus events worldwide across maybe 1,000 different event organizers. So we certainly have a perspective about events and what event organizers are facing. And for starters, I'd like to take a step back and just describe how we see the overall event ecosystem in terms of organizers, because there are different kinds of organizers that have different goals that they're trying to accomplish. So roughly, our experience has been roughly a third, and a third of corporate and media brands, membership organizations, and then professional event organizers. So that's the way we see the overall market. So just a quick poll. I'm interested to see in the audience, you know, where do you fit in that range? So we have an agency in the audience. There you go. We have corporate brand in the audience. No membership organizations, associations. There we go. Very interesting. Very good. So now I'd like to step back and talk a little bit about the event tech ecosystem. So what we mean by that is the different technologies that you as organizers are using to put on your events. So these are just examples of types of technologies that we see sort of across the board. So hopefully everybody's using some sort of CRM system to track your sales and your potential customers. There's also marketing automation in the mix so that you can do the kinds of automated digital marketing efforts that Will was talking about tracking before. There's certainly your registration platforms like Weems that you used here to register for this event or Cvent or eTouches. There are mobile applications, a host of them, like we're using two here, Glisser and Guidebook. And then there are all kinds of social tools in terms of interacting with social media, in terms of sharing information back and forth, and hopefully in terms of helping people engage with each other, because one of the reasons why we come to events is to meet people. Otherwise, we could stay home and find out information online. So I'm interested to know how many different products do you have in your individual event ecosystems? Get a sense for that. So it's interesting, we're focusing in on a couple. In many of the larger clients that we work with, the large corporate brands or media brands, they often have many. Yeah, we see some people in there that have quite a few. So I would expect the average to be more in the 4 to 5 range overall, and we're sort of getting there based on people's responses. So that's interesting, thank you, I appreciate the feedback. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about what we call data exhaust. So people are using all these different technologies, and part of the problem is that none of them are integrated together. So each one is creating its own little silo of data. And for instance, if you're using Salesforce for CRM, Salesforce has fantastic analytics, and you can look at that slice of data through Salesforce. But at the same time, if you're using Marketo for marketing automation, they have great analytics, which is showing their silo of information. But ideally, you as event organizers really need to see what's going on across all of that data, really, because this is your event ecosystem. This is your event process that you're using this technology to drive, and this is your event business that you're trying to generate revenues for, hopefully. Or if it's a case of a corporate brand, maybe it's not about generating revenues from the events, maybe it's about generating revenue from sales that result from these events. Whatever your particular goal is that you're trying to accomplish, it's really important to see what's going on across the whole event ecosystem that you're using. And what we see is most of this data just goes poof, up in smoke, and it's gone. And we've seen that for a long time. Back in the mid-2000s, we started seeing that there's this huge value in all this data that people are collecting, but virtually nobody is really leveraging all that data to produce results for their events. So, why is that? I say the biggest problem is that people don't really have a data strategy. And what does that mean? It's an often overlooked term. So my experience in talking to many, many, many people who organize events is that they don't necessarily have clear goals for what they're trying to do with their events. And the first session today, we started off talking about ROI, and one of the recommendations was to start with the end in mind. And certainly, that's where I start in terms of my big 6 steps to really creating a solid data strategy. I think it's very important to start with that end in mind. What we see happening instead is that people in the event space are selecting technologies to use around their events in an ad hoc way. It's sort of what's the newest, coolest, shiniest, glitziest looking tool to use for my event. But there's not a lot of thought given to what's actually the business outcome that we're trying to produce. Based on that business outcome, what are the metrics that we want to use to measure and help us achieve that outcome? Based on those metrics, what are the pieces of data that we need to collect to be able to create those metrics? Based on the data that we need, what are the tools that we can use to collect that data? And then once we select those tools, how do we integrate all that together? So the process is sort of backwards. And that's what we're trying to really work with the industry to try to change that behavior and have people think more about data strategy and why it's important. Got ahead of myself in my slides. So what we recommend is that you start small, because all this can be incredibly overwhelming to event organizers. We know the persona of event organizers, so we know you all run around like chickens with your heads cut off trying to get events put together and get them actually done. And at the end, you're exhausted, and then you take a break, and then you run right off to start the next event. And there's not a lot of time to actually pull back and analyze your data. So one of the reasons we exist is so that we can do that for you. We can do a lot of your heavy lifting. But when we engage with customers, we recommend that you start small, because it can take many event cycles until you sort of streamline your overall process. And last but not least, it's very important to have a mindset of iterating through. You know, data analytics isn't something that you do and magically all of a sudden you get insight into what you're doing. It's something that you need to go through multiple cycles, and as you improve your process, you get more clarity into what you're doing and how you're driving your business. You get more streamlined in your processes, so the data you start getting back is more accurate and more actionable, and eventually you will straighten out the overall process and get the maximum amount of value you can from your events. So, question for you, how many of you actually have a clearly defined data strategy? I think that's 2 people. One has a strategy, one doesn't. So it's interesting, the feedback that we're seeing here, people think that they have a solid data strategy. I would love to talk to those people afterwards and actually talk about their strategy and see what it is and see how how they've actually organized their data. Because part of the problem that we find is that because the data is coming from all these different systems that are very siloed, it's very difficult to connect the information together. So it's very difficult even for many organizers to even understand from their registration system those same unique individuals in their CRM system that they might already know. And it's very difficult to tie to their other systems like marketing automation or other different kinds of engagement technologies that they use. So how do we tackle this problem? And what do we actually do with InsightXM? We talk about our 4-step process of aggregating, enriching, analyzing, and then extracting insights so that we can inform our customers and help them drive their business. So aggregation is really all about taking all that data from these different systems and pulling it into our infrastructure and then essentially deduping that. So there's an age-old CRM problem of deduplicating data and making sure that you don't have the same person in your CRM, multiple times, because that's not good. It's inefficient. If you want to run marketing campaigns, you don't want to send multiple messages to the same person. From a sales perspective, you want to have a clear picture of which people are actually driving business, either at the individual level or most likely the corporate level. And so it's very important to be able to clearly aggregate that data across all of your event tech that you're using. Next, we talk about enriching the data. So what we talk about really is moving beyond the contextual relationship that you have with your current customers. So by contextual, I mean most, especially in the B2B world, most of what you know about your customer is a very small slice of that overall individual, and it's just based on your business relationship with them. But the whole rest of the pie represents the rest of that individual, and understanding more about that individual helps you get the right people to your event, helps you provide content and methods of engagement that resonate with those people, based on their behavioral profiles, their psychographic profiles. And it also helps you understand better how to get the right sponsors and exhibitors that will meld well with that audience. It helps you understand what those people are talking about today, so what content is relevant, helps you understand who the key social influencers are in your audience so that you can attract them, because they will help attract people to your events. So there's a lot of information that can be gathered through that enrichment process, and it's very, very critical to the overall success. And then we go on to provide quite a bit of different kinds of analytics, and the real magic occurs when we go beyond the pure data science of analyzing your data, and we actually take the experience that we have in the space and we add that into the mix. And so based on all of the events that we've seen and all the event organizers that we work with over the years, we take that industry expertise and combine it with the analyses to help you actually derive out of these analyses direct actions that you can take to help improve your events. So getting back to the concept of iterating through your data, I like to use the analogy of peeling back the onion, because really data analytics, as I said before, is not some magic thing that you do and all of a sudden you understand. It's an iterative process, and I like to say it's like, you know, you start with the first analysis and you get some insight, and then you peel back the onion another layer, and then maybe you add some other data to the mix, you do another analysis, you say, aha, I see something more. And it's actually a never-ending process of sort of improving your overall process, adding data to the mix, getting better visibility into what's going on amongst your audience and amongst your events. And the last bit that I want to talk about is the kinds of data that you're looking at. So much of the data that is analyzed from a marketing perspective and has been analyzed for many, many years is what I call sort of just demographics. It's basic attributes of people in terms of title, age, gender, location, basic marketing demographics. And when we talk about personas and really segmenting audiences, a lot of that conversation is really about demographic information. We believe it's very important to add another dimension, or actually two dimensions, and they both fall under the heading of behavioral data. So in terms of behavioral data, we like to split that into two buckets. One bucket is data around how your audience is engaging with the event. So there's all kinds of different engagement points, from people visiting booths at trade shows and getting scanned by the people that are there. There's attendance to sessions. There's feedback on sessions. There's interaction with the event website prior to the event. There may be content that is being pushed out through marketing automation and which people are viewing that content. There can be automated marketing campaigns driven, and people are engaging with the brand all sort of around the event. And understanding all that behavior is critical. The second part of behavioral understanding is what we call psychographics. So this is the whole area of neuroscience that we've added into the mix, and we are analyzing audiences from that perspective because it can tell you an awful lot about the people that are coming to your event. So for instance, we've analyzed audiences and seen that from a psychographic perspective, you know that people have either a positive world outlook or a negative world outlook. The old saying, the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. So depending on how your audience is skewed, understanding that can inform you about how to market to that audience. So for instance, if your audience is dominated by people with a negative worldview, then you have to send messages out of, here's a pain point that you can avoid, and that will resonate with those kind of people. Versus the opposite, if somebody has a positive outlook, then you would market that by providing a positive goal that they can move towards. Other examples are what kind of events people like. Some people like events that are sort of lectures, you know, and sessions that are more lecture type. Others prefer sessions that are more engaging and sort of hands-on participation. Understanding that kind of stuff from your audience can make a huge difference in people's, number one, their interest in going to the event, but number two, how much of a positive experience they have at the event. Right, Mike.
So we've covered quite a lot of areas here. Initially, looking at the problem and thinking about technology as a problem solver rather than just something to be tried out. And then Will's gone into his troubles in extracting data around events, that people aren't doing this, that there's a challenge, but actually there's a huge opportunity to get attendees, to get media companies recommending your events and actively pushing sponsors towards events if you can provide them with that data. And then finally, Chett talking about how you can actually use that data. So it's not just a question of collecting it, but actually collecting it in a strategic way, collecting it and iteratively improving the way that you're doing that. But I think sometimes these sessions can be very theoretical, and actually what you've come here for are a few practical ideas. Give us some examples. So I'm just going to finish off the session with a few technology companies that we work with, or we look at and we understand, and we think they're doing well. I just remind everyone, please do ask some questions. We've got time at the end. We can see a few coming up, but we'd like to see a few more. If you have any questions about what we've covered, just key them in through the app. And in structuring where we might have some ideas about different technologies that you can use, I think there's a sort of common theme here. It resembles that process flow that Chett used. That actually within the event there are a number of stages, and at each of those stages there are technology options. And this principle of starting simple and then iterating means that maybe you should just be looking at one of these options initially, one of these areas, and really focusing on that to deliver value, to solve problems within your events. And depending on where you have the most problems, where you have the pain points, that's probably where you should start thinking when you're looking at technology. So everything from the CRM, the data crunching at the start, the ticketing and registration process, through the live event itself, the mobile applications, socializing, and then the analytics piece at the end. So just some technology. Ingo, I don't know if anyone's heard of Ingo. Ingo basically exploits existing attendees' social networks. So this is right at the start of the process. This is when you're trying to encourage ticket sales, you're trying to encourage attendees. You may already have some attendees, some sign-ups. Ingo actually allows you to activate their own social networks so that your existing registrations can actively promote your event through existing social media channels. It's a really interesting concept. People go to events on the recommendations of others, so why not use technology to help facilitate that? Really like that technology. There are alternatives, but that's one that we particularly found useful. It's probably one of the biggest event technology companies in the world, and I imagine many of you do use Eventbrite already. But I think what's really powerful about Eventbrite is that as a business, it's trying to do that integration piece. It's trying to help. So one of the challenges that Chett spoke about was this idea of data exhaust, that you're using all of these technologies through all these steps within the process, and as a result, you're getting lots of separate silos of data. Eventbrite are actually partnering with as many event technology firms as they can that are useful and trying to bring that data together. So they're actively positioning themselves as somebody that's not trying to create lots and lots of new data fields, but actually bring that and consolidate it so that if you run your ticketing initially through Eventbrite, ultimately then you can bring in these other pieces of technology. So I think that's really interesting that somebody as big and as well known as Eventbrite is engaging the rest of the tech community, the event tech community, and saying, how can we share data? And I think that's really important for the event tech community generally, that we work together to try and solve these problems and don't just create new problems for you. During the event, of course, Glisser. One thing that you've noticed that we've been doing today is collecting these data fields, running these polls. So we're collecting data live during the event that we can then analyze, we can pass over to InsightXM to analyze. And this is a typical output from a Glisser presentation where we can actually understand with a heat map the level of interaction throughout the presentation, the number of votes, the number of likes, the number of questions asked on a slide-by-slide basis. So you can actually start to map how people are interacting during the live content, and that's useful data that can then understand your audience and the quality of the presentation. I don't think you can forget the obvious ones. LinkedIn. It's a huge opportunity to use LinkedIn to understand who your attendees know and use them to exploit the opportunity of the network environment, to try and encourage their colleagues to come, to talk about the event, to tweet about the event, and to use LinkedIn to post about the event. It's really important that you recognize that. Don't think that just because something is free, or you think that it's focused on one particular thing, that it can't be exploited and used for events. And finally, of course, I've got to suggest InsightXM as a final option. It's that data analytics after the event. So we highlighted that problem whereby so much focus goes into the run-up to the event, delivering the event, communicating with everyone, arranging everything, getting everything perfectly in place for that point. Then when the event comes along, very, very focused, perhaps some firefighting, and then as soon as the event is over, the breath of relief, and you stop there. That's the worst place to stop. That data needs to be taken, it needs to be analysed, and it needs to be worked, and InsightXM is a great option for doing that. So thank you for that. I will quickly bring up the questions that we have. So, Chett, maybe just talk about how you can, I guess that's handle too much data. When you have too much data, what's the starting point for being able to handle it?
Yeah, so the answer is carefully, because it's difficult dealing with data. The reason they call it big data is that literally it's big and it's hard to deal with. And one of the things that we strive to do is actually to take big data and make it into small data that you can consume and understand and extract actually the actions that you need to take to help improve your performance.
And how do I go about consolidating data to paint a full picture on my event and my attendees? So you've handled it, you've got it together. How do you really consolidate it? Is there data that you can remove that's unnecessary, or is it all valuable? How do you look at that?
And that's another actually really good question. So on one hand, the more data that you can collect about people, the better, because you get a clearer picture. On the other hand, the more data you collect, the harder it is to deal with because you have a lot of data. The bigger problems that we're seeing are actually having a solid data strategy and having a solid technology strategy and having those different technologies integrated so that you can identify the individuals that are going through that event ecosystem or that event process all the way through the process. That's the bigger problem. So, you know, at first we work with our customers to establish that strategy and to set some foundations for analytics, and then to help them consolidate, aggregate, deduplicate their existing data.
Just add to that. One of the biggest things that my clients keep asking for is that not actually that they don't want data, but actually they value insight far more than data. And so you've got to have the data to be able to generate insight. But from my client's point of view, you just say, here's some data. That's meaningless. You're asking them, you're leading them to water, but you can't get them to drink. You need third parties, you need the ability to analyze that data to provide one or two key things to bear in mind. And that way, clients and attendees can take action points away. What did I do? What can I do better? What should I do? And being able to answer that question, what should I do? Should I attend this? Should I sponsor this? Should I come? Did I get value out of it? All those sort of questions can be answered in part by data, but also require analysis.
And then the question there is, what are the most common problems you find this technology will help solve? So we've covered a wide range of technologies, but particular problems that we see, we sort of break down the live event into two areas, one being the content and the delivery of that content and what problems can be solved there. When we developed Glisser, we thought that the key feature for audiences, the key benefit for audiences would be the interaction. Actually, we've found, since we've launched the product, that the key benefit for audiences is that they can take the content away, that they can take the slides away and keep them. You know, the number of times that event organizers get asked, either during the event or straight after the event, can I have the slides please? Because I want to take them away. Or I want the slides because I don't want to have to scribble down all the notes on all of the key points. I'd just rather get the slides, it will save me time. Or I want the slides so that I can share them with my boss, so to show that I've been there, or to spread them around the company. So actually that was a problem that we didn't necessarily identify, but since we launched the product, we found that actually we were doing a really good job of solving that particular problem. and then it's become clear that it's there. There are numerous other registration, Ingo and Eventbrite and Weems. All of these companies help with that process, the onboarding process, which for an event is the critical time when people arrive. If that process doesn't work correctly, then you have initially a very challenging feeling. And how much do we depend on the internet connection? Can this be turned into a negative aspect if there is a poor one? So, of course we do. And I think that many of us will find that venues really aren't keeping pace with the technology to deliver the appropriate internet connection. What we're actually doing with Glitter is we're moving that problem in advance of the event so that you download the slides before you actually live here, and we simply reveal them to you as they're presented, but they're already on your devices. That means that those of you in the audience here can be running on the Wi-Fi, but you can also be running on your regular telephone network because the amount of data transfer during the live event is relatively low. But I think as event organizers, we have to go out and we have to make Wi-Fi and we have to make connectivity a really important part of the product. Nowadays, it's not an option, it's an optional. It should be something that's a clear focus for an event. I heard the term that the Wi-Fi is as important as the toilets. I think that's the case. Everybody's on their devices now. They need that access. They need that access for their own jobs, let alone the event technology. So certainly, when you're looking at venues, don't just look at the look and feel of the room, but really delve into the technology, the Wi-Fi options, to make sure that it can meet your requirements. And I think that's all the questions we've had in. So I will pass through to one final slide, which will allow you to give us any feedback. So this is our final piece of data capture. This is free text. You can type whatever you want. Love, hate, want more information. This is really important to us. We won't show the results up on screen. We're not that brave. But we will look at that and we'll follow up with anyone that's interested and use that to refine what we're doing. Because we believe that's really important for presenters, to be able to get that instant feedback and actually improve for the next time. And that's a core feature. Presenters can't be just left to stand up here and pitch and talk to you without really understanding what you felt and where we can be improved. So please, any ideas for improvement and feedback is more than welcome. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks to Mike, to Chett, and to Will. Fantastic presentation, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. So, oh yes, applaud them again. They were great. They were fantastic. So now it's time to take another break for some coffee or the Wi-Fi or the toilet, whichever you think is more important. It's entirely up to you. Think about that. Back in here in half an hour's time, I'm going to say my farewell to you briefly. I've got to go and rehearse for the award ceremony this evening. Eva here will be taking over. She's much younger and better looking than I am, so I think you'll be better with her than with me. So I will see you this evening, and I will encourage you to come back here in half an hour's time at 3:15. Thank you very much.